Wonderful. Well, thank you all for being here this evening. I am delighted to welcome our speaker, Mara Gorman. She represents Delaware's 23rd House District in northern and western Newark that includes the campus at the University of Delaware. Prior to running for office, she served as the public affairs manager for Planned Parenthood of Delaware and was a longtime volunteer for Moms Demand Action. So she has been a busy person fighting for the rights and safety of all Delawareans. As the Moms Demand Action chapter lead, she successfully fought for the passage of numerous pieces of gun safety legislation, which I think we have seen those bills being passed in recent years. And that included the recent permit to purchase bill. So we are grateful to Mara for her efforts. This evening, she is going to speak about an issue of great importance, which is protecting the rights of our immigrant neighbors. This is a topic near and dear to her heart, and she has focused on that in her brief time in the legislature to this point. So it gives me great pleasure to introduce Mara Gorman and turn the microphone, if you will, over to her. Welcome, Mara.
Thank you so much, Sue. I really appreciate it. And thank you all for inviting me to speak and for being here this evening. I thought what I would do is just give a little overview of the situation in Delaware, the work I've been doing since I took office, and then leave plenty of time for you all to ask questions about anything that's on your mind regarding recent legislation or things that you think you might want to try to do to take action to support our immigrant community. I actually started working on legislation around immigration the day after the election when I realized that Donald Trump had won. And that was simply because I remembered what had happened in 2016, and I was deeply concerned about, what that meant for our neighbors here in Delaware. I anticipated that perhaps it was going to be worse than it had been in the past. I think it has been even worse than even I had kind of imagined that it would be. Unfortunately, I wish I had been wrong. But I pretty much pivoted away from everything that I had been talking about when I was running for office to switch my main focus to be on the immigration issue. And I'm glad that I did that because it did take quite a while to get everything organized and filed, and I did have to push to get these bills across the finish line. So what I was able to do in the between November and June 30th, when we went into recess, was pass 4 pieces of legislation. And I have several others that have been filed that haven't been passed yet, but I will talk about those as well. And then I'm going to talk a little bit about why the legislation is necessary. So the first piece of legislation, it was a ban on citizens' arrests in Delaware. That was an affirmative ban, not just a, they mostly don't happen, it's not a big deal kind of a thing. We're the first state actually in the country to affirmatively ban citizens' arrest, which have, I imagine that this group knows a lot about the racist history of incarceration of people of color after Reconstruction, since Sue is your leader, and I know she knows a lot about that. And so the bill addresses that longtime concern for communities of color, but I was also just worried about, Delaware is an open carry state. People are allowed to carry weapons freely, and I was worried about the harassment and even potential detention of our immigrant population by people who are not law enforcement. So it was with an eye to that I filed that legislation. When I spoke about it publicly, I mostly talked about the racial piece because that made it broader for people, and it kind of took away from, the concerns that people had about like foiling what the federal government was trying to do. Because early on, when I was starting to work on this, there was a lot of concern about what the implications would be if we stood up to the Trump administration. So we passed that bill. We also, and it was signed by the governor, we passed a bill that removed some other racist Jim Crow language around the detention of individuals, um, that basically worked along the same lines, but didn't quite go as far as banning citizens arrest. Um, I also had filed a bill that made it a crime to impersonate a federal officer. It was already a crime to impersonate law enforcement of every other variety in Delaware. We just added federal officer to the code again, and that was in response to seeing, kind of the tactics and the way that ICE was behaving. And again, concerns about someone deciding to pretend that they were ICE and use that as a means to harass and intimidate people. That bill actually passed unanimously in both chambers after the unfortunate shootings in Minnesota. That bill actually, a lot of people don't even really know about it because it never had a committee hearing, because we walked it to the floor after the shootings in Minnesota. And I had a lot of support from my colleagues for that bill because of what happened there. I think it was eye-opening for people and they saw what that meant. And then the final piece, and I would argue probably the most significant this spring that we were able to pass, was a bill that banned 287G agreements. 287G agreements are agreements that ICE enters into with local law enforcement to have local law enforcement perform some of the duties that federal law enforcement performs around immigration. And immigration enforcement is solely the responsibility of the federal government. It is not intended to be the responsibility of local law enforcement. And actually, although the ICE and the federal government was claiming that there were financial perks for law enforcement agencies that entered into these agreements with them, in fact, studies have shown that it costs local communities because the law enforcement has to get trained. They get pulled off of their regular duties. So they're not enforcing, local laws or protecting us the way that they're supposed to. So there's like both a human cost and a actual financial cost to communities that enter into these agreements. And part of what the impetus behind this bill was that Camden, Delaware, which is just south of Dover, actually tried to enter into one of these agreements. They were talked out of doing so by some of their colleagues, but some excellent reporting by Spotlight Delaware and some FOIA requests revealed that the department was in fact planning still to try to enter into the agreements once we were out of session, that they only backed off because they were worried that we were going to pass legislation like this. So the original bill that I introduced went pretty far and basically said that local law enforcement was not allowed to partner in any capacity with ICE, with federal agencies about immigration. I had to negotiate a lot. I probably met 10 times with law enforcement to talk to them about this bill. And it really required a lot of conversations with them, with some of my colleagues who wouldn't have supported it if law enforcement didn't support it, and a lot of just back and forth with different stakeholders to get to a place where we could pass it, which required amending it. And when I amended it, it weakened it somewhat because it took out the provision. It took out the broadness of it and made it just about the 287G agreements. I would have preferred the broader bill to pass, but I preferred to have the 287G agreements banned than nothing at all, which would have sort of the alternative choice that we had. And my attitude about the bill, I was actually asked a question by a journalist about it this week. I view the bill as intended to encourage good behavior on the part of law enforcement, local law enforcement, to tell them, we are watching you. You told us you didn't need for us to restrict your cooperation with the federal government in these terrible ways that we don't want you to be cooperating with them. If we see you doing that, we Delaware are watching you. And if we see you doing that, we can go back to the drawing board in January and see about changing and expanding that law now that we have a toehold with the 287G agreement part of it passed. I'm hoping that we won't have to do that, frankly, but That is my attitude about the bill. And when I get to the end and talk a little bit about things you can do, that is actually one thing that I'm specifically asking people to do is kind of keep an eye on what's going on. Because obviously I can't have my eyes everywhere. Um, so those are the bills that were passed. They were signed by the governor in July. They are now law in Delaware. I also introduced a bill that would ban private prisons in Delaware. We don't currently have any. Um, Many of you may know that the big so-called Big Beautiful Bill has a lot of money in it for things like not just the actual enforcement, but for the detention of immigrants. We've seen what's happened in Florida with what they've built there. And so there's going to be a lot of money pouring into this industry. And I don't want anyone to get it into their head to build one of those private prisons in Delaware. I actually feel that it would be a moral stain on our state if we had one of those institutions, which pretty much uniformly are worse than public prisons. I had actually already filed that bill before the budget bill was passed, but my plan is to make sure that that gets a committee hearing as soon as possible in January and get that on the books so that we can make sure that that doesn't happen here. Um, and then I also have a bill about arrests at courthouses, which has passed out of committee, has not had a floor vote yet in the House. I'm hopeful that I can get some changes made to that bill that will actually expand it. I had someone in the committee hearing talk about how there are other government boards that immigrant populations have to appear in front of, such as the labor board, that are not actually courthouses, but happen in, other contexts. So I'm going to look at expanding the bill to maybe include every context in which someone might have to come before like a government authority and talk about themselves or their work, or where ICE might have the opportunity to um, detain them. And then I also want to look at whether that bill or a separate bill could include not allowing them to go into the treatment areas and hospitals, which we know that they have done in some other states. So that's the work that I have done so far. I'm also looking at drafting legislation around the use of masks by law enforcement and the use of or the non-use of identification to make sure that when people are being detained, that we know who is doing that work and that we know who they are and that they actually do work for ICE and that they're held to account. So I'm working on that bill right now with one of my colleagues. And I probably will do some other things, but right now that's sort of the scope of what we're looking at. I will say right now that there are probably some bills that you've heard about that were filed by another colleague of mine, a representative from Dover. I can't really speak to his bills and his process. He filed his bills and they all got through committee. Only one of them has had a floor vote. They have to do with, some of them have to do with data sharing. They have to do with ICE going into schools. Some of his bills, I have serious questions about how enforceable they are. The schools one, I actually looked at doing a bill like that and was told by the Department of Justice, who I have worked very, very closely with the Department of Justice on all of my bills. And I was told it wasn't really enforceable. And so, he's going to have to fight that battle for himself. I have really tried to only introduce legislation that I thought was both enforceable, had buy-in from all of the stakeholders, and that could get passed. That to me is really important. I'm a big fan of not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good. I think the 287G bill illustrates that point nicely. I like to get a toe in the door, and then I think you can have a much better chance of getting the door wide open if you take that approach. And the reason that all of this is needed is because, Delaware has not seen the kind of violent detentions, mass detentions that we've seen in other states. and we have a smaller population, but it was reported in May that the administrative arrests of undocumented citizens were up 115%. So almost 2 arrests a day in May. And there hasn't been reporting. I was looking today that would give me a number to say how many people a day are getting arrested now, but I assume it's going up. And one thing that because they're enforcing more because they have more money now and more people, one of the things that they've started doing everywhere more, and this includes in Delaware, is arresting people on what's called criminal reentry. So that's someone who has been deported and has come back. And for a long time, those people weren't necessarily, unless they did something criminal, were not arrested. That is now being treated as a crime by the Federal Department of Justice. So we have seen an increase in those arrests in Delaware as well. And the other thing that has happened is that ICE has subpoenaed payroll records from 15 Delaware businesses, saying that they're employing undocumented workers. Matt Meyer and the Attorney General are fighting that request, saying that they don't have a right to do it, that basically at this point what's happened is the governor has asked them ICE to prove that they have a reason to see those records. I believe that they have until September to produce that, and then there's going to have to be a decision about whether they have to turn the records over. And I don't know what the next step in that whole process will be, but at the moment, we're waiting for Homeland Security to provide, adequate reason, which I'm not really sure that they have what would be adequate reason, although the judge may decide otherwise. The judge in that case is Colm Connolly. So pretty much that's the story. The most affected communities are actually in southern Delaware. So Dogsboro, Seaford, Frankfort, and Millsboro are among those the most impacted. They, of course, have a large immigrant population because of the poultry industry. And there was an excellent report. There's been some really great reporting by Spotlight Delaware about how people are suffering. And they are not going to work. They are tinting the windows of their cars. They avoid leaving their homes. People are refusing to drive the vans for the companies that they work for. And they've created their own Signal and WhatsApp groups to let each other know about where they see ICE activity. So there's like a tremendous amount of fear and stress that comes with this. And that's true for people who are not undocumented, but who are related to people who are. And I think there's also, quite frankly, a lot of fear in the community of people who are here legally, but who are, originally from somewhere else, because they know that they're being pretty indiscriminate in how they are. ICE is being pretty indiscriminate in how they are detaining people in other places. So it's scary. And I'm very concerned about the traumatic impact of that kind of fear. I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and I said, for me, it feels like, and I don't want to, I think this fear for them is probably worse. But if we think about how afraid we all were at the beginning of the pandemic, I know that I was so scared that I was going to get sick and get separated from my family, and that, I didn't know what would happen and that I might die, and, that my kids could get sick. Like, I think if we all think of it in those terms, like that kind of day-to-day stress is so, I'm just certain that there's going to be really negative impacts even on people who are ultimately able to stay here and continue living their lives. So part of why I'm committed to passing these bills is to try to demonstrate that Delaware doesn't believe that we should be doing this, that we are a state of neighbors, that we stand with our neighbors, and that to help try to alleviate some of that fear. But I'm going to be really brutal about this fact, which is that federal law supersedes state law. So for instance, the bill that I want to introduce about the masks, we're not sure that we can really even do it, like if it will actually work, because I don't know that we can dictate what federal agents do. Um, so, that doesn't mean we shouldn't try, and we will try, but um, the landscape for this is really, really challenging right now. And the best thing, of course, ultimately will be if we can change the direction of the federal government and who is in control of it. But obviously, we have to continue to act in between now and then because, I anticipate that this is going to get worse before it gets better because they have so much money. They have more money allocated to Homeland Security and to immigration than like Israel has allocated to their military. So it's a lot of money. So that is kind of a snapshot, a picture of what is happening here and what I've been working on to try to ameliorate the situation. I'm happy to take any questions that you might have about anything I've talked about or anything else.
Where are the Delaware ICE arrests? Where are they taken?
So it depends. It used to be that everyone who was arrested in Delaware ended up in Pennsylvania and Philadelphia because we don't have an immigration court in Delaware, which was one of the reasons I will say I didn't prioritize that courts bill over the other ones. I had to kind of pick and choose which ones to get through quickly. And that one I didn't demand a floor vote for because, we do have the advantage here of not having an immigration court that they can hang out outside of, which is like what they're doing in Manhattan, right? Um, I have come to understand that now, in addition to taking people up to Philadelphia, they sometimes take them to Maryland, particularly people who have been detained in the southern part of the state. But it's also been really hard for people to locate. Like, there is a certain amount of sort of disappearing that's going on where loved ones, families don't know. And that's what causes the panic is when you don't know what's happened to the person who you care about. I haven't heard of that happening in Delaware, but that doesn't mean that it hasn't happened here because although I am been very involved in this, like, the people who are most impacted, they're not out there talking to me, right? Because they are kind of underground right now, frankly. Sue, do you want to call on people or do you want me to do it? I don't
Sure,
know
I can do that.
Sure.
Probably Maria has her hand up. It could be Craig.
I know both Maria and Craig because we went on a pilgrimage last year together.
Yes,
Yes,
you did. Yes, you did. I was so sorry not to be with you. Yes, indeed.
Thank you, Mara, for all your great work. I have two questions, hopefully not too complicated, but one is, what can we do in Delaware to protect our data? Now, I know if they have a warrant for someone's arrest, then maybe that data should be given. But to give them all of our data in Delaware makes absolutely no sense. They have a right with a warrant, but I won't give them that right otherwise. And I really want our state to protect us. I don't know how, but that goes from the governor on down, okay? So whatever you legislators can do, I really hope you can do something. The other concern is that, I don't know, historically, is this the only time in our current life and history that people are arrested and then taken across borders? I mean, what's the word? The jurisdiction of where you commit a crime is where you're indicted or something. In other words, if you were in New Jersey, but you committed the crime in Delaware, they'd have to, Delaware would have to ask for that person in New Jersey and bring them back to Delaware, right? So how come, these people haven't really committed a crime, and yet they're being taken across state lines. There should be a law that protects us against this being taken to wherever across the state line and then to another country? Golly day,
So,
can't we
yeah,
do
no,
something?
so excellent. Those are excellent questions. So starting with the second question first, that is exactly what they're doing. And there have been some high profile cases where they did that, and that case was, like someone had like the public will and the lawyer, the student at Columbia, the graduate student who was arrested, and I believe also the young woman who was arrested in Massachusetts for writing an editorial. Like those, they were taken to Louisiana, and then it was successfully fought to bring them back, right? And now they've been released. So it's not like everyone has been taken away and no one has been released, but I think it probably depends on your ability to have people know that you've been taken away and people to help you. I do know of a case in Delaware where someone was taken away and then brought back. I don't want to talk about the particulars because I don't really have the privilege to do that. But so there's some underground efforts by the part of attorneys general. Our attorney general is very involved in this, and immigration lawyers to, in individual instances, make sure that people are brought back as they should be and follow that law. You don't The thing is I guess I would need to look at the code, and that's an excellent question, and I can certainly do that. I feel like what they're doing is actually already illegal, I guess is my answer to your question. So I don't know if this is a matter of passing laws. This is a matter of our Department of Justice enforcing the laws and fighting for the people who are taken away and insisting that they get brought back. And also it does help, I will say, if our law enforcement isn't complicit in terms of, and this actually ties into your data piece. I wanted my original bill to say that they couldn't do any data sharing. The problem is that law enforcement does things like drug enforcement, internet crime, human trafficking. We do have like instances of human trafficking in Delaware, actually in my district. And their concern was if they lost access to all the federal resources and information around that they wouldn't be able to do their jobs successfully, particularly the state police. They know that we don't want them sharing any other data. And if you ask them, they will tell you we don't do that. Like if I pull someone over for a traffic stop, I don't ask them for their immigration status. Now, are there cops who that's probably not true of? I believe that there are, but what I have been told by law enforcement is we don't do that. So, and you never trust us, and so on and so forth. And so what I'm saying is, I have decided, like, in order to make sure that we didn't have the 287G agreements, to say, okay, fine, we're gonna trust you that you won't do these things because we Delawareans and we, the General Assembly, do not want you to. And hope that works, but we all have to keep our eyes open, if that makes sense. And I think, that's where the community comes in. That's where being a responsible observer and knowing the rules of like that you can video someone, that you can ask for a warrant, that the ACLU does excellent training on this. That's where that comes in as being important, is that if we can all be good bystanders and make sure that we're helping local law enforcement. But I don't know that we can do much about ICE, frankly. Our attorney general and our governor are already fighting the data piece, this request for the SNAP information. They're fighting this request from the Department of Labor to get the records of these businesses. I think that right now is more effective than us just passing laws, because basically I'm not really sure that it's legal for them to do that without cause. They're going to continue to fight. And so this is like a whole team effort. And we're just really lucky here in Delaware that the Democrats have control of everything. I will say one thing that would be really, really helpful would be to have a supermajority in the House, because then we could do 2/3 bills. Like one of the things about this bill about masking is if we make it a felony to wear a mask, we need a 2/3 vote in the House. It's a 2/3 vote because it's introducing a new crime. And I don't know if we're gonna be able to do that. And I don't think it's as effective to pass a law that says that you're just gonna fine someone, especially when they have basically endless resources. So like there are like things that don't seem like they relate to this, but they do. And that would be one of them.
Thank you.
Does that answer your questions?
Yes, thank you.
Okay.
Elaine, you have your hand up?
Yes, hi, thank you. This has been very, very interesting and informative. I was wondering, across states, obviously states are really facing common challenges. Is there some sort of organizations or other entities that are giving guidance to you,
Mhm.
model legislation, for example,
Yeah.
or some sense of how to prioritize action? What would be most effective? All of that.
Yeah, that's a great question. And actually, I did have a lot of help and guidance in getting the legislation done this first part of the session. So the ACLU has been an invaluable partner to me, and they do have often model legislation. They have lawyers at the federal level. We also have, honestly, some amazing staff in our legislative body. The lawyers for our caucus and also we have two different sets of drafting attorneys that we can rely on as legislators, and also staff who do research. And these are people who have been legislative fellows, who have public policy degrees from the Biden School. And so they'll do research to figure out what other states have done. We look at what other states have done. We model things on them accordingly. So every piece of legislation that I've done already has been modeled on things that other states have done. And then we also have the drafting attorneys taking a second look at all of that. So we have partisan ones for our caucus, and then we have ones that are the Division of Legislative Services, and they're nonpartisan, and they also have a research division. So we have a lot. We're actually really well resourced for a part-time legislature. And I think I didn't actually know fully about this until I was in office. And I thought I knew a lot about what's going on. I'd spent a lot of time down there as an advocate. It's really impressive. And those people are working all the time, and they are on board with this and really invaluable and so helpful to help set the priorities and figure out, what we should or shouldn't be doing. The private prisons bill is an excellent example. When I brought that up, and again, I brainstormed that idea with the Department of Justice. So just to give you a sense of like, we're crossing branches, we're working together. This is an all hands on deck situation. I brainstormed that idea. When we did research, they passed a bill like that in California, which did have a legal challenge to it, but that was because they already had private prisons in California. So my feeling is that we probably won't get the kind of legal challenge that they had because we don't have them yet. So that's why I feel like it's imperative. I want to get that on the books as soon as possible when we go back into session in January.
Well,
So
you don't have anything like comparable to say ALEC, that would be a sort of an overarching guidance to state legislatures, not only in Delaware but other states.
I
There's
mean,
nothing organized along that level. On that
no,
level.
we don't. I mean, I wouldn't say it's organized, but I would say it's like we have all the information is there for us, if that makes sense. And I don't even know fully what databases all of the researchers have access to.
Right.
We also have access to all the information for the National Council of State Legislatures, but
Sure.
the problem with that is they're bipartisan.
Yeah.
So they will do research for you if you ask them. But I haven't actually felt like I needed to rely on anyone other than our staff because they've done such a fantastic job. We're not now, the Attorney General is part of a group. I do know this, and I think it's like 20 attorneys general who meet regularly, talk to each other. And so when you see in the newspaper that there's like a group of attorneys general filing lawsuits, it comes out of those meetings. And like I know, for instance, that Kathy Jennings is very close with Tish James, who's the attorney general in New York, and has worked very closely with her. So like I think, everybody is if you're interested in this issue, you are all working together. It's not organized in the sense that it doesn't have like a name, like we're not having meetings, but we're all watching each other and learning from each other. And like the idea about the hospitals, I can't remember if it was New Mexico or it was one of the Western states. Someone filed a bill on keeping them out of the treatment areas of hospitals that I will be using in the drafting around that. So like we are in conversation in that way. And I think it's hard because you are a little bit heads down in Delaware. And the other thing that you have to remember too is like what is possible in your own state. So what can you pass or get accomplished with the people that you have in your caucus who all have to support what you're doing, right? And sometimes that's not exactly as you would have the world be. But that's politics, right? Like that is, and Delaware does have some diversity in terms of viewpoint, just even if you go from north to south, even among Democrats.
Thank you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Mara, you talk about all hands on deck.
Mhm.
The fact that it takes, well, it takes a village, it takes everybody. That work of the attorneys general, as I recall, that unofficial group began working together about a year
Yeah,
or more before the
that's right.
2024 election, recognizing what might happen and
Yes.
beginning to put in place the sharing of information and ideas and getting the legal background justifications so that they could hit the ground running should the worst happen,
Yeah.
as it did. So I think it's a great tribute to Kathy Jennings and to the Delaware Department of Justice that's a banner that they're carrying because, as you say, we can pass some laws, but there have to be other mechanisms through the judicial system that we
Right.
utilize.
Yeah.
And they
If you
work
don't
together.
enforce,
They work
if you
together.
don't enforce the laws, then they're just words.
Right.
And which I think actually is what we're seeing happening at the federal level.
Yeah, no
Um,
question.
right. So, and I cannot speak highly enough of the Department of Justice's team on this issue. Like they are so committed to helping to solve this problem. And Dan Logan, who is the Deputy Attorney General, used to work for Homeland Security. So like he knows a lot about sort of how the sausage gets made, how things work. If anytime I had questions or needed to talk to them, they were available to me. So I do want to make it clear, like there is so much collaboration that's going on behind the scenes. And I think that's really critical because I know that when I went into this, I had a very idealistic view of what I wanted to do. And there just were some things that we just could not do. And it breaks my heart that we couldn't do them. But it doesn't make sense to devote your energy to things that aren't actually at the end of the day going to do anything practical to help, in my view.
Thank you. Let's see, Lisa, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yes. Do we know anything about the training limits of the levels of power, controls on the behavior of the ICE agents? I mean, is that public knowledge?
So just in general, I would say federal law supersedes state law. So if federal agents have a right to come in and do something, then that supersedes us. So if you look at it like a pyramid, like, and in Delaware, for instance, like who has jurisdiction over what, right, is dependent on, like the University of Delaware police don't have the kind of jurisdiction that the state police have. And the federal agents they have jurisdiction over the entire state. I will also add, and I'm not saying this to be scary, but it is just a fact that I think a lot of people don't know. Technically, Delaware is a border state because we border the ocean. And within 100 miles of the border, they actually could come in if they wanted to and set up checkpoints everywhere in the state. Homeland Security could, because the entire state is within 100 miles of a border. And they have not done that. I'm hoping that they won't, but they technically have the right to do that. And so when I first started working on this, that was one of the fears. Like I got that pushback even from Democrats, like don't draw attention, because if you draw attention, then they're going to do that and then we're screwed. And I was like, well, honestly, I think we're in trouble either way. And it doesn't make sense to me to not do what we can to try to fight and at least bring public awareness to the situation. So obviously I was able to overcome that initial resistance. And I think some of that was just when people started to see what they were doing and things like this, concentration camp essentially that they've opened in Florida, like those kind of things changed public perception. So I do think like talking about that is important. Like just the more people who understand what is going on, the more we can be allies and we can resist collectively.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Marge, you have your hand up?
Yes, thank you. I have actually two questions kind of related. One is, what are the objections that you get from across the aisle in the legislature? And let's start with that. Yeah.
Sure. Well, interestingly, every bill that I passed with some bipartisan support, which surprised me, I'll be honest. I didn't expect that. The bill about impersonating a federal, no, I'm sorry, excuse me, the 287G bill, which I would have assumed would have no Republican support, did have some in the House. And then Dave Lawson in the Senate, who is he voted for my bill, which
Wow.
if you had told me at the beginning, the day after the election, when I started working on this, that not only would I be able to pass this legislation by June, but that Dave Lawson would vote on yes on two of my bills, I would have said, what universe are you coming from? That's even weirder than the Trump universe, frankly.
Right.
But the arguments against it generally are the ones that you would expect to hear around federal authority, around criminality and immigrants, around like the only people that they're taking away are people who should be taken away. And quite honestly, I didn't get a lot of pushback in the sense of like them saying a lot of things about these bills. They just voted against them. So I think they know they don't want to have a lot of sound bites, frankly, of them saying things like that. I'm assuming that they believe that their constituents want them to vote against them for those kinds of reasons, but they're not necessarily going to go on record saying those things out loud. Dave Lawson, I didn't get to hear the Senate debate on 187, the 287G agreements, because it was the last day of session and I was in the House.
Right.
But apparently he said he just doesn't believe that state police should be involved in federal enforcement in that way. Like that's just a core belief of his. And I was like, who knew? So you never know. But yeah, I mean, I think that their arguments against them are the standard ones that you would expect. But I also think, again, the fact that they didn't say a lot tells me that they don't want to be like that they're hearing what's going on around them. And they, if we can turn this tide and make the immorality of what's happening. I mean, it's hard for me to understand how you couldn't see it right away. I mean, obviously I was concerned about it before any of it even happened, but like making it uncomfortable for them, I think is key to part of this as well. That's sort of subtle, but like it's definitely there.
The other question was, and it's related to as you present your bills, is the faith community in Delaware is a little bit I don't know what the word is. I don't want to say.
I was going to say, can't wait to hear what word you're going to pick, Marge.
I was going to say skittish, but maybe that's not the right word. We're all a little bit apprehensive about stating where we believe we should be, because we don't want the unintended consequences of the federal government coming on to Delaware. I believe the federal government's going to come on to Delaware anyway because Joe Biden's here, so I don't know that that's a reason not to do something, but we also don't want to exacerbate reactions. So, do you have anything to say about that?
I mean, look, again, I said we're all neighbors. I mean, we are all neighbors. And I think a lot of times it's a matter of making people understand what this really means. That we're not talking about, violent gang members when we talk about this, or someone who's committed any kind of violent crime. Obviously, we don't want those people, anyone who's done that, no matter where they were born, we don't want them doing that in Delaware. We don't want them hurting children, right? Like, we don't want that to happen. But, this is impacting communities that build our homes, that grow our food, that support one of our biggest industries in the state. There are people who we know, who we see, all around us. I go to a nail salon in Hockessin to get my nails done. And everyone who works in that salon, I believe it's a woman-owned salon. I believe the owner is from Mexico. And everyone who works there almost everyone who works there has parents who are from Mexico or Central America or South America, actually, even. And they may have been born here, but I know a lot of them, their parents haven't been. But I've gotten, I go in there, I get my nails done, and I chat with them, I talk to them. And they've come to know who I am, some of them, partly because they saw my campaign signs and they hear my name and they're like, they've made that connection. And I can see, like, they are human beings to me, and they get into conversations with me in the salon about this. And I will have those conversations with them, with other people who live around, hearing them. And I think that to me is like talking about what's happening, not in a j'accuse way, but more in a like, this is the reality. This is what we're dealing with. This is happening to you. This is happening to your mom. Within earshot of people who maybe haven't thought too hard about it. I think that is really valid. And I feel like in a faith community, you do have that opportunity, right? Because you're gathering, you're conversing. I think sometimes that kind of conversation is maybe even more valuable than going out and standing in the street and yelling about it. Do you know what I mean? I mean, that has its place too, believe me. I've been out. You may have seen videos of me out yelling. But, I just think that what we have to do here is have a collective awareness of what is actually going on and make it unacceptable to everyone.
Greg or Maria? You're muted. I'll get my wine glass.
I wanted to ask if I could had the time, and we seem to, that I just wanted to pick your brain, Mara, about these concerns of troops invading our cities.
Yeah.
These are now armed National Guard troops, and unfortunately, I think Delaware could be targeted with the same excuse. There's no excuse, but the excuse is there's lawlessness in the city, and I'm going to control it. Has there been any discussion? I'm sure it goes to the governor's level, but I wanted to hear your take and position on that.
So I think obviously I don't want that to happen. I think the thing about Delaware is I think we all thought that because Joe Biden was from Delaware, that there'd be this like real focus on Delaware. I haven't really seen that, to be honest. And I don't know if that's because they're not super organized or if they've moved on to other things or, I don't know why that is. And I agree with you. It could turn on a dime. They could it could be the next thing that they do to distract is like, this is where Joe Biden's from, so we're sending in the troops. But I haven't had any indication that that's going to happen. And so, and that frankly, that's not going to involve the legislature. That's going to involve the governor and the attorney general. Obviously, I think every member of the legislature, I'm pretty sure, would be opposed to them having our National Guard troops in our cities, in Dover and Wilmington, which are the largest cities. And I guess I have a mindset of that of like, we'll jump off that bridge when we come to it. I'm trying to work on the ground now with like things where I feel like I can actually maybe make a difference and get them to stop some of the tactics that are being used and make it safe as possible for everyone so people feel safer, instead of hypothesizing. Because, honestly, like some of what I'm putting forward, with the 287G agreements, I think is a really good example. We had one police department who entered into one, they backed out, and we acted right away. So like, I do think we're small enough and people are aware enough and we're in communication enough that when something happens, we can take action. And I think we will. We already came back into special session to deal with an issue that was about taxes. I don't see any reason why, if something really dire happened, we wouldn't go into session again if there was something that we as a legislature could do to fight it. I guess I would reassure you on that front. Like, and Delaware is small. Like we do have that advantage. We're more nimble in that way, just because we're not as big. But yeah, I know everyone's really worried, and I just want to say to you all, like, I'm worried too. This is a really hard and challenging time, but you are on the right side of history in what you are doing, just having these conversations. And I know the work that your faith community and you all individually are doing is making a difference and is really helping. So I want you all to know, like, I see that, I see you, I feel supported by people like you to keep doing the work that I'm doing. And, and I think that's true of all of us in the government who are trying to stand up to what is happening in our country. So we're all in this together. This is definitely a group project.
Anything else that you would suggest to us, Mara, either as individuals or collectively, that we could do to help move the needle, to help make a difference?
I definitely refer you all to the ACLU. I know Lynn told me that they came in and spoke with you at some point in the spring. Their resources are excellent. They can offer trainings and information about how you can be helpful. I think the protest piece is actually really important. If you're anything that you're doing in that vein, and there's a lot of opportunities, I'm sure you're all aware of them. I know this group of people is plugged into that kind of thing. I think that is, really, really valuable and important. I think when it comes to election time, it's going to be really important for us to be paying close attention. And to Delaware, we don't always do that. We kind of go elsewhere. It would be really, really helpful if we could get a supermajority in the Delaware House. Because I'm looking at a bill that I don't know if I can get across the finish line on this without a supermajority. And we only need to lose one of the Newcastle County Republicans for that to be the case. And keep letting your Democratic representatives, if you have a Democrat representing you, let them know how important this is to you so that it doesn't get backburnered, because it's somewhat easy for that to happen because like there is a lot going on, and this is not in Delaware. I mean, thankfully, the good news is that it hasn't been in our face as much. So, I don't know that everyone is thinking about it as much as, you all are or I am. So reminding your elected officials that this is important to you and that you want to make sure that they take the corrective action that these bills provide, that's important too.
And I think one of the things that, I'm speaking for myself, that happens, our representatives in Congress hold views that I generally support.
Yeah.
And I think there's often a tendency to just say, well, so they know that, right?
Yeah.
But I think it's useful to say, atta boy, atta girl, thank you for doing that. And or here are things that I think that you and your colleagues and your counterparts should be looking at, should be focused on. This matters. This matters to me. I know we've heard that it makes a difference in Delaware because we're so small, and
Yes, it does.
representatives get, like 100 phone calls. It's like, I guess people care about this.
And I'm going to tell you, Sue, 10. They get 10 phone calls.
10?
We came back into special session, it was not hundreds of phone calls. And I would also add to that list the governor. Make sure that you're letting him know that this is important to you. He definitely, I'm so pleased that he signed all those bills. Like, we have more work to do. He needs to hear that we still have more work to do. I think that's really important as well. And, and I'm so grateful to my leadership, to the governor, to the attorney general, to all of these people in these positions of power who have really are circling the wagons to keep Delaware safe as we can. I am not doing this by myself at all. Like, there's advocates, there's leaders who are we're just all working to make this happen. And Kathy Jennings in particular and her entire team deserve so many accolades for the work that they're doing. Like, I can't even imagine how exhausting it is, like every single day for her. So.
All right, well, we have come to the end of our time. We are always willing to go a few minutes over if someone has a final question or comment. There are a couple hands up, and I don't know if those are leftovers. But Sally, I haven't seen your hand up before, so please go
Oh,
ahead.
this is first. I just wanted to echo the importance of making phone calls. And Sue, you said that our delegations were aligned with our delegation, but I know I've heard Chris Coons and his office say more than once it's really important to call, and that they track what people are calling, and it gives them a sense of what people are worried about. So I echo what you're saying, and Mara, I'm so grateful for your work. Thank you, thank you.
And I think that last piece is just so important because I think for many of us, there's some days we're going and we're protesting and then there are days it's like, oh, I'm so tired and it doesn't make any difference what I do. And I think we need to keep reminding ourselves that it does.
Yeah.
It does matter. It does make a difference. And even if it's, just 5 calls or a phone call or an email or whatever, that's a small price to pay for helping to shape the work that our leadership is doing and their understanding of how committed we are to making sure that Delaware, the United States, does the right thing. So
Absolutely.
challenging times, Mara. Thank you so much for your energy and your
Absolutely.
commitment in this. We appreciate it.
I appreciate all of you. Thank you for having me. Happy to come back anytime.
Okay, we will take you
All
up
right.
on that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah,
Thank
absolutely.
you.
Good night.
Thank you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.